Hello, viewers of IMPAKT TV during the IMPAKT Festival. My name is Arjon Dunnehund and I'm here with our star guest of tonight, Orit Halpern. Tonight you'll give a lecture, presentation on your new book, still to come out, The Smartness Mandate. And we're delighted and honored to have you here and present your book. Maybe you tell us a bit about the Smartness Mandate.
Well, first, I'm honored to be here, and I just can't get over the title of your festival, because actually, a lot of ways, the Smartness is about the curse of smooth operations. It's about the way that failure and infrastructural failure, in particular, all the things that go wrong with our roads, buildings, political systems, are actually ways that that encourage people to want to find technical fixes. So you would think with all this technology and things not going so well, maybe we'd rethink our approach to something. But actually quite the contrary. The more things don't go well, the more we need another version or planet B or more tech to fix what technology is already causing. So in a lot of ways, the book is about this imperative. But more broadly, it's also about just how is it that we think that we can solve all of society's problems with ubiquitous computing. Really, very simply, like why do we keep picking certain types of technological solutions over other ways of dealing with questions, and also what do we mean when we say smart? That's, of course, a complicated question. There's lots of definitions. But for the most part, and the book's role is to actually help us rethink smartness and rethink how, as a society, we've come to kind of believe in ubiquitous computing so heavily as a solution to everything from environmental problems, smart homes, smart grids, smart medicine, and to medical problems, and also, of course, ultimately, people think that political problems are both caused by, but ultimately need to be solved by technical infrastructures. Mm-hmm. So we interrogate that, but we also don't think smartness is bad. We're actually not technophobes. We actually want to think about what smartness could be, what kind of system.
Who's the we? Except for
me and I have a co-author, Robert Mitchell, sorry. I'm like we, not the global we. It's not the royal we, it's two people. I don't speak, I don't know who else agrees, but we look at all sorts of different initiatives from indigenous sovereign energy projects to different visions of the smart city to try to open up how we're thinking about the future of technology.
What drives this imperative? Is there a force behind it? Who makes us desire smart things?
Well, that's a complex question. I'm actually, I'm not a causal, I don't like to say why, how does it happen? Obviously there's a constellation of things like that merge. Political economy, there's obviously an economy behind it. There's a lot of big corporations. There's a lot of invested interests. But there's also ideology behind it. And a lot of times a convergence between political interests, but also individual, between political interests, between things like racism or xenophobia. There's a lot of work on smart borders, for example. So usually there's a constellation of things that come together. So I wouldn't say there's an origin, because I think that makes the world boring. But I would say that there's often a constellation of interests that guide, how we build infrastructure.
But I mean, seeing this imperative as a problem, I think it's good also to understand what feeds or drives it, if you want to address that as a problem. How does that relate to you not wanting to be a causer.
Well, there's two parts of your question. The first is, I'm a historian, so at least in this account, smartness is really linked to a transformation in political economy and technology from the 1970s. So we really peg it to being affiliated with neoliberalism, kind of the privatization. So a lot of smart solutions, for example, microgrids, can be very good, can be very energy efficient, but are also a lot about privatizing what was once a public infrastructure of energy, for example, into the home. And the move to kind of move towards those kind of solutions, you see really dramatically in the 1970s, and it converges with the rise of the right and with a transformation in post-Fordism, post-industrialism, globalization. So we peg it, and decolonization, and we do peg a lot of this as ways people are managing, transforming global geopolitics through technology, or even internal politics. So for example, in the United States, because I think it's helpful to ground, the discourse about kind of interactivity in the smart city, for example, often came up around people dealing with race warfare in the wake of post-civil rights, the MLK's murder, and basically a lot of rioting and issues about dealing with race and basically race warfare. And arguing that politics wasn't working, there was an increasingly push towards like technocratic, like the fantasy as we abandoned things like public housing, social welfare programs. There was a push to say, well, instead of planning, we'll have the self-organizing system. The data will drive urban planning, so we won't have to deal with urban politics. So that's really specific. So for us, it's really, really linked to these kind of structural transformations, and particularly, at least in the US, to race, but also sex, questions in terms of how people, in this case, we're talking about certain corporations, the Republicans in Congress, you know, it's not a general we, you know, decide to solve these problems. So they turn to kind of computing and technology as sort of a way to solve political issues. And sometimes even supposedly progressive people do, like there's good and bad things, like the limits to growth situation. For example, people like Buckminster Fuller, like people really thought like politicians have put the world in a bad place and we need a technological solution. And there's some hope in that, but there's also a real problem that it is a bunch of, you know, white tech bros with very limited understandings of what makes human well-being, how human act, you know, what constitutes the human, that are programming these ideas into these machines, and that continue to inform, I mean, what we think machine learning is and adaptation in any system, whether it's a social network or, you know, all of those are models of socialization, of how we interact with each other. But for most of us, it's really grounded in this kind of historical moment.
Smartness being such an overused term, maybe? What was the most
especially here in Europe.
Yeah, more than in the States?
Right now, you know, the States are in a bleak place, so they've moved to resilience, although resilience is a big part of the book, and tonight I'm going to talk about resilience actually more than smartness. But yeah, there's still, I hear it more often, I don't know.
The question I want to ask is, what is the most stupidest use of smartness, like in combination with what? Smartphone, smart city, but it must be so fashionable to use that people come up with the stupidest.
Gee, that's a tough question. I don't know. I guess it must be in the smart fashion sector. I'm like blanking right now, but I mean, I don't know, the smart shirt. But in some sense, that makes the most sense because actually I kind of like the word smart because it's not, intelligence actually has quite a history with race and normality. In the history of intelligence has been a lot about quantifying and trying to figure out who's smart and who's not, and usually discriminating against women, people of color, et cetera, as not being as intelligent. Smart, however, smartness, you can look smart. That's that's a saying in English. You can also, something can hurt you, it can sting you, and it smarts me. It smarts my hand that hurt. So it also speaks to these ideas of like performance aesthetics, but also pain. So we don't usually, and again, it's not always just about intelligence. So it kind of breaks away from that. And in the book, we kind of think about that, like what are these other possible smarts? And so in that sense, I guess I shouldn't have said smart fashion because it's the most smart of that, because it makes sense to look smart. Yeah. But usually when people say it, they're like, my sweatshirt's going to do something for me. But it's mostly about temperature control, really.
We have a smart AI. We just got a few minutes left. Let's try and squeeze in a question from the AI, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Give me a number between 1 and 10.
6.
6. Let's go for question number 6. So, we could see the question, the audience at home also heard the question.
Is that really, do those really come from AI?
Yeah.
There was one, oh really? Nicholas Negroponte once ran this thing on this study on black men where they faked the AI just to see what they would say. But anyway, I think there is good and bad technology. I mean, I do think there's good and bad uses of technology, but I do think there's good and bad technology. Obviously, a lot of technology has kind of Faustian capacities, both really excellent and really bad. But some technologies, there's all sorts of missiles and targeted applications for things that really don't have multi-use. So I would say you have to situate the question of good and bad in terms of the space, and obviously you have to decide what's good and bad. I already just made a statement that clearly indicates I have a moral position on certain automated forms of warfare, let's say. But, not everyone shares my opinion, sadly, but...
Super. It's a big question, and we only have short time to respond to that, but people can hear all about you in your presentation tonight, the Smartness Mandate. So you can see it online and tune in, or you can come to het Huis Utrecht, here in Utrecht, to the IMPAKT Festival and listen to Orit Halpern and her presentation of the Smartness Mandate. Thank you, Orit, for being with us.
Thank you.